There's the never-ending debate, cardio versus weightlifting. But let me settle this debate right off the bat. They both have their places. But we're going to compare the two training modalities based on their most questioned aspects, their overall impact on weight loss, and their health benefits. Let's get into it. Don't you need to do cardio for health? Always a question I get, and one that I appreciate because the person is considering their longevity and not just the way they look in regards to their training. However, there's a misassumption that resistance training confers either very few or no health benefits at all, and this simply isn't true. So let's take a look at a few of the most common diseases and how resistance training may impact them. Heart health. Cardio wins automatically. Right. Well, based on the available research, they both seem to do an equally good job of improving heart health. People typically assume cardio will be better for two reasons. One, the name, cardio. Names are important, obviously. Two, regularly elevating your heart rate should improve your heart's functionality. Now, both of these things are indeed true. I want to state this one more time for the record. Both of those things are indeed true. But it's not the entire story. Of course, cardio is great for your long-term heart health, but so is resistance training. There are a few things to consider here. Let's start with the most simple point. The heart is not your brain, meaning it's not particularly intelligent. It is not differentiating between the modality of exercise that you're using. If you've ever done a set of 15 squats, you know that your heart rate gets very elevated. So the question then becomes, how much heart rate elevation do we need in order to see health benefits? While I don't have a hard line on this, and it doesn't seem like the research has one either, we do know that resistance training does at least enough heart rate elevation for us to start seeing some heart health benefits. The second mistake people are typically making here is assuming that improving your heart health is purely a matter of elevating your heart rate. There's another big element at play here, and that is inflammation. Quickly, let's define inflammation, acute inflammation, and chronic inflammation. Inflammation, the body's response to a foreign substance or an injury. The immune system sends out cells to heal injured tissue or trap foreign agents. Acute inflammation. Inflammation happens in an acute manner and begins the healing process. This is what happens when you cut your finger, for example. By the way, this is also how muscle growth occurs. You damage a muscle, acute inflammation happens. As the inflammation cools or lessens, the muscle repairs larger and stronger. This kind of inflammation is good and necessary and is the reason why non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen are not very good for you. Chronic inflammation. The body continues to send inflammatory cells even when there is no injury or foreign substance. One example of this is arthritis. Inflammatory cells continuously attack the joints, causing pain and damage. Chronic inflammation is extremely unhealthy and will lead to all sorts of health issues, including cancer and diabetes. And obviously, this is true of heart disease as well. And one more quick point on chronic inflammation before we move on. Chronic inflammation is extremely detrimental to the muscle growth process. If your body is always in a state of inflammation, then the acute inflammation that happens after lifting weights will not register the same way. Again, if you're already inflamed, the body won't go, oh, now this muscle is inflamed because, well, the body was inflamed anyway. So you won't get as strong of a recovery response and process after having lifted weights. Some of the things that can lead to chronic inflammation: alcohol consumption, sugar, obesity. Chronic inflammation is one of the things that makes obesity so unhealthy, as well as poor hormone production. Chronic stress and smoking. So now we come full circle. Heart health is not just a matter of elevating your heart rate, but also a matter of avoiding chronic inflammation like the plague. And both resistance and aerobic training accomplish this. And of course, this isn't theoretical, I brought studies. One study from 2010 found that resistance training was effective at improving inflammation levels and lowering risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. A meta-analysis from 2012 that included 21 studies found resistance training effective for lowering individuals' age-related chronic low-grade inflammatory state of being. This lowered the incidence of heart disease as well as sarcopenia, or age-related muscle loss. Another analysis of 78 studies found both aerobic and resistance training to be effective at reducing chronic inflammation and preventing all the diseases that come with chronic inflammation, including cancer. Now, all the above means that resistance training is inherently protective against all the things that are caused by chronic inflammation: cancer, autoimmune diseases, metabolic diseases, gastrointestinal diseases, lung disease, and even mental health conditions. But I want to emphasize on diabetes for a moment specifically. The more muscle mass you have on your body, the better your insulin response to consuming food will be. So again, for another reason, resistance training or lifting weights is inherently protective against diabetes. In one study that assessed thousands of healthy males from age 10 to 60, the researchers concluded the study findings suggest an inverse association of the skeletal muscle mass with blood glucose level, which encourages the implication of muscle building exercises as the preventive measure for type 2 diabetes. Well, what about the joints? Surely cardio is a safer method of exercise. All that lifting weights will ruin your joints over time, right? Nope. An analysis done by the good folks over at Bayesian Bodybuilding looked at 4 different training categories for their incidence of injury. As you can see, running had nearly as high of an incidence of injury as playing team sports. Of course, most team sports, if not all of them, I can't really think of one that does not have running involved. No, I can't think of one. But they also will usually involve some level of contact, so that's going to lead to even further injury. Powerlifting, Olympic lifting, and CrossFit had relatively low amounts of injuries sustained per 1,000 hours, and bodybuilding style training had very low amounts of injuries sustained. Now, why might this be the case? I don't have a study on this, so I can only speculate, but I think I can make an educated guess here. First, most people don't look into running technique when they decide they're gonna start running regularly, because why would you need to work on your technique for running? Running's a natural thing, we're built to do it. But technique is very important when running. Whereas on the other hand, when a person picks up weightlifting, they will usually at least look up a video on how to perform certain exercises, especially the big compound lifts, out of fear that they are going to injure themselves. And that fear ends up having a positive net impact. Second, lifting weights also makes your bones and joints stronger. So as you are lifting weights for longer and longer periods of time, you are making yourself more resistant to injuries as well. So you've got kind of a vicious cycle going on, but a good one. And third, while running, every time your foot strikes the ground, that's another jolt of force that shoots through your joints. It's very high impact running. A jolt of force goes through your ankles, your knees, and your hips with every single step. Now consider you're taking hundreds, if not thousands, of those steps when doing one bout of cardio. Now also consider doing that multiple times a week for multiple months, for multiple years. That is a lot of impact that will build up on those joints and can, again, lead to injury. Also think about the surface that you are running on. If you're running on the sidewalk, like a lot of people do, that concrete is gonna tear your joints up, just to be straight up about it. Running on a track would be better because it's a softer surface. That's why tracks have a softer surface, to help absorb the impact. And a quick side note, this is why during my personal training days, I never let my clients do straight up running. If we were gonna do any form of cardiovascular exercise, I always would try to put them on the elliptical, although some people, especially the guys for whatever reason, hated using the elliptical, but because your foot isn't leaving the surface, there's no impact on the joints. So you can still elevate your heart rate with none of the impact. And final point on this, there's also a lack of impact when lifting weights, making it not only supportive for your bone and joint health, but again, you don't have all that impact building up over the course of months and years. You do cardio to lose weight, and you lift weights to bulk up. Well, this is the big one, the most commonly held misassumption in the debate between cardio and lifting weights. Maybe the most pervasive fitness myth, and I only say maybe because I still sometimes hear ladies say, I don't want to lift weights because I might get too big, which is to me like saying I don't want to play basketball because I might make it to the NBA. And these days, I hear people arguing that being obese is just as healthy as being lean, which is simply not true. It's not true. It's not true. So let's dispel this with research. Let's start with the idea that you burn more calories and therefore fat while doing cardio because your heart rate is going to be more elevated when doing cardio as opposed to lifting weights. This is actually true. Your heart rate will be higher, you will burn more calories, and you will burn more fat doing cardio within the session. Within the session. This is important. We're going to come back around to this. But once again, this isn't the entire story. First off, the amount of fat being burned during a session is infinitesimally small. I always struggle to say that word. Infinitesimally small. One review of 64 studies stated that the effect of regular aerobic exercise on body fat is negligible. This same study also stated the amount of fat burned within a session was usually no more than 10 grams, and there are roughly 454 grams in a pound, by the way. So if you're trying to lose several, if not dozens of pounds of fat, just doing cardio is simply not the way to go. I also pulled some of the studies from the review. Specifically, one group of researchers found an improved amount of weight loss for those who did cardio and dieting as opposed to just dieting. But once again, they found it was a relatively small amount. So yes, cardio will burn more fat than lifting weights, but it isn't the fat burning furnace it's made out to be. It's more like the flame of a lighter. And yes, an hour of cardio will burn more calories than an hour of lifting, but we arrive at another misassumption here. Burning calories does not mean burning fat. It just means burning calories. Calories are calories and fat is fat. But obviously, the amount of fat burned within a session when doing weightlifting would be even lower than the cardio modality, right? Yes, absolutely. But what about after the session? Really quickly, let me explain how body fat loss happens. You have what's called total daily energy expenditure, or the amount of calories your body will use over the course of a day. This is to keep your organs functioning. This is to digest food or add any physical activity you might perform that day. That's your overall daily energy expenditure. Then we have energy consumption, or put more simply, eating. When the amount of calories consumed is greater than the amount expended, then you gain weight. When the amount of calories consumed is less than or fewer than the amount of calories expended, then you lose weight. Things can get quite a bit more complicated from there. The human metabolism is pretty complex, but at its foundation, that's the way it works. But the primary detail we need to be focused on here is resting energy expenditure, or resting metabolic rate. The amount of calories that you burn when at rest, when you're not engaged in physical activity, when you're sitting, watching Netflix, or playing video games. Since the amount of body fat that we can burn in a workout is so minuscule, wouldn't it be great if we could burn even more calories outside of the workout? See where I'm going with this? One study found that the more muscular subjects in their study had an average of 14% higher resting metabolic rate than their less muscular counterparts. For context, let's say hypothetically the less muscular person had a resting metabolic rate of 1,500 calories. The more muscular person would have, based on this math, a resting metabolic rate of 1,710 calories. So the more muscular person could consume 210 more calories to break even, making it much easier for them to eat at maintenance level of calories or to stay in a caloric deficit, because you can literally eat more food and still be in a caloric deficit. And before you ask, no, you don't need to get obscenely muscular or look like a bodybuilder in order for you to see these benefits. Another study done on men ages 50 to 65 found an increase in resting metabolic rate of 7.7%. Two other things interesting about this study. One, the subject's weight did not change. Their weight did not change. Their muscle and bone mass had increased at the same rate that they lost body fat. So the weight did like this, it met in the middle. So the weight stayed the same, but they got leaner than their non-lifting counterparts. The other interesting thing here is that this was an 8-week-long study. And so 50 to 65-year-old men are not going to put on slabs of muscle, especially in 8 weeks. So you don't need to build a significant amount of muscle in order for you to start seeing this benefit. Not enough evidence for you yet?
But wait, there's more.
Massive study with 10,500 subjects that took place over 12 years compared waist circumference and body weight for those who did weight training and those who did cardio. The researchers found a greater diminishment in waist circumference for those who performed resistance training over the cardio group. However, they did find that those who did the moderate to vigorous aerobic activity lost more weight than the weight training group. So how does it make sense that the resistance training group had a greater loss in their waist circumference while the cardio group had a greater loss of weight? How does that add up? This makes total sense when we stop conflating the words weight and body fat. I would always tell clients that what you don't want is to lose weight. Your weight is made up of several things. The water your body is retaining, undigested food, your bone mass, your joints, your muscle mass, and also body fat. What you really are concerned with losing is the body fat. This is also why body mass index stops being a good measurement for people who lift weights. I, for example, would be considered overweight by the BMI standard, but I stay between 10 and 12% body fat year round. The question is not about weight, but what that weight is made up of. So it makes complete sense in the previous two studies that the cardio group lost more weight, but the resistance training groups lost more body fat and waist circumference. You may have heard the old phrase, eat less, move more, when the topic of how do I lose weight comes up. It's definitely worth checking out Menno Henselman's article, Why Eat Less, Move More is Bad Advice. It is excellent. I'm gonna link it in the description below. And frankly, I arrived at Menno's same conclusion. It is bad advice. On the surface, it seems like a totally reasonable assertion to make based on what we talked about a moment ago with total daily energy expenditure and just making sure you're burning more calories than you are consuming. However, it ceases to be valuable advice once you start to look a little bit deeper. Consider this. The number one predictor of diet success is not the diet itself. So the whole paleo versus keto versus if it fits your macros versus this new diet, we can dispense with all that. The number one predictor of diet success is adherence, or does the person stick to the diet? This has been found in a multitude of studies. And the number one predictor of adherence to a diet is hunger. If you can avoid being hungry, you are far more likely to succeed. Hunger is one of the body's most intense motivators. You could argue that along with reproduction, it is our most intense motivator. We don't really identify with that in these modern times of abundance where you've got access to food everywhere, but our hunter-gatherer ancestors certainly could identify with this idea. People on Instagram and YouTube with the motivation videos, they'll drone on and on about how it's just a matter of discipline and mind over matter. And while I agree with that, discipline and mind over matter and all those kinds of things are very important and you should aspire to discipline, it's not the entire story. I think it's a bit myopic, to put it kindly, again, because of the potency of hunger. There's also an issue of efficacy long term with the eat less, move more advice. As you lose more and more weight, your metabolism will begin to slow. It's your anti-starvation mechanism. And so you need to eat less and less. So long term, if you're only doing cardio, then you will either have to just keep doing longer and longer bouts of cardio, further upping your chance of injury, or you'll have to just eat less and less, or both, in order to continue losing weight. Neither of which are feasible long term. But again, what if we could eat more food and still lose the body fat that we want to lose? Sounds like a win-win, right? And we come right back around to weightlifting. Lifting weights makes it easier to lose body fat. It makes it easier to keep the body fat off while concurrently allowing you to eat more food and not less. Well, surely there's some good reason to do cardio, Ty. Of course there is. Now, I'm done with the studies. I'm just gonna speak on my opinion here. I think it's extremely unfortunate that here in these modern times, we are at a point where everything is so black and white. It's either good or bad, this or that. We're at a point now where if an exercise scientist makes the claim that lifting weights is the better training modality, that they're saying that cardio is useless, that you should never do it, that they're insulting your favorite thing, and that is not what I'm doing, and this is usually not the case when somebody makes this claim. Of course, cardio is useful in certain contexts. Say, for example, you are dieting down for some kind of show or competition. You need to get that energy expenditure up even higher than reasonable levels. Cardio would come into place. This brings me to the title of today's video. Is cardio worth it? I'm going to quote my favorite writer here, C.S. Lewis. It is hard because so many people cannot be brought to realize that when B is better than C, A may be even better than B. They like thinking in terms of good and bad, not of good, better, best, or bad, worse, and worst. I'm going to adjust Lewis's next sentence to fit within the realm of today's topic. You want to know if I think cardio is a good form of exercise, or you want to know if I think cardio is worth it? Well, I would reply, lifting weights is the superior method of exercise for all the reasons I articulated, but, there's a big but, cardio is better than doing nothing. I would ask you, do you like doing cardio? Is it an enjoyable form of exercise for you? Then do it. Cardio is great for your heart and carries with it all kinds of health benefits for your physical body as well as for your mind. I would call resistance training a borderline necessary part of your training regimen. And while I have many views on the optimal and suboptimal methods of resistance training, so long as you do some kind or degree of resistance training, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, you will see all the benefits that I articulated earlier. You don't need to select exercises with the perfect resistance curve or concern yourself with stretch-mediated hypertrophy or any of the complicated topics that we exercise science people love to bloviate about. And I would call cardio more optional. Cardio is most certainly better than doing no exercise at all. And I'm gonna refer back to what we talked about a little bit earlier with diet, the adherence factor. My question for you is, do you enjoy doing cardio and do you hate doing lifting? If you enjoy cardio and hate lifting, then frankly, what I just talked about, all the research, none of that stuff really matters because you wouldn't adhere to the program anyway. Put more simply, if you enjoy running, go run, man. Go ahead. That's it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for listening. I know this was a long one. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Let me know what you want to hear from me next, and I will see you with the next one. Deuces.